Morning, church. All right, today's scripture reading will be Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 17. And once again, that is Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 through 17. And it reads, "If your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault, just between the two of you. If he listens to you, you have won your brother over. But if he will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church, and if he refuses to listen to even the church, treat him as you would a pagan or a tax collector."
Good morning. It is good to see everyone here, and I will echo Charles that it is good to see so many faces, and all the faces, like the whole face. A couple weeks ago, we started a series on Sunday mornings taking a look at what the Bible has to say specifically about the church. We know that there's a lot of ideas that are in the religious world about the church. We hear that word passed around very frequently in the religious discussions and in the world today. But what is the church, and what is it all about, and why is it so important? And the Bible has the answer for that. And so we're going to be looking at what the Bible has to say every time that word church comes up in the New Testament. What the Bible has to say about that. And we get a great understanding, a great insight as to the purpose of the church and what we can do in order to make the church very applicable to us, and why it is so important, and look at and examine why the church is so important for each of us in our road to heaven. What we're going to look at this morning is something that can really solve a lot of problems in the religious world, and specifically among brethren. The first mention of the church we looked at 2 weeks ago, and that was Christ talking about the church that he would build, and just how he would be the foundation, the rock of that church. And it's interesting that the only other time that Christ is alive when he makes mention of the church is what we're looking at today in Matthew chapter 18. Now, he does make mention of the kingdom, and as it references the church, but the only other time he specifically talks about the church, and the church being the ecclesia, the called out. And of course, in Matthew, when we look at it in Matthew 16, the first time that Christ does mention that, the called out, the church, is the one that he would build, and he recognizes those who are called out would represent those in the church, or they are the church. In this one, it's more of a congregational sense. When you look at the church in the New Testament, it can be either or. It can be, the church universal as the one institution that Christ has established, and that there's only one way in order to be added to it, and we'll look at that in the coming weeks. But then it's also can be the congregational sense of the word. The church is in the local body, the called out ecclesia in a local sense. And that's what we're going to be looking at primarily this morning. Jesus, when he taught a lot about how to handle different disputes and differences. Of course, he told us how to treat one another with love and kindness, and that we have to look out for each other's well-being and be sensitive to others and their backgrounds. But he also had a lot to say about the disputes among brethren. And of course, he probably saw a lot of it during the time that he was here. And he was only here for a few years. But he still was able to see different people that disagree with one another. And he tells the church how to handle these kind of disputes. And if you look at Matthew chapter 18, early on, Jesus is teaching his disciples about how to restore a soul. He talks about the one straying sheep and why it is so important to go after that one person and to bring them back. And of course, those who stray and those who drift away from the church, and they don't stay in compliance with what the church is all about and what Christ teaches about the church, is represented by that one sheep. And we need to do everything we possibly can to try to get them back. And how great it is when we're able to restore someone to the kingdom of God. But then he turns his attention in verse 15 to something else, a dispute. And it's interesting as we look at it this morning, when with the title, as you see, is "Tell It to the Church," and that's a reference that is made in verse 17 of Matthew chapter 18. It says, "If he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church." What I want to be very clear about this morning is that when there is a dispute, that is not the first place that we go. And it's very important for us to recognize that, and there's a reason why. But when you look at, because this goes back to verse 15 of how we start, when someone has wronged us, or when we have wronged someone else, there is a proper way to handle this. In verse 15 of Matthew 18, though, it says, "Moreover, if your brother sins," that word is Tyrese, I think in his translation had, if they offend or if they do wrong, and that's the context of what this is right here. If they have, if they sin against you, or if they offend you, or if they do wrong against you, you think of how many times that has happened in the congregation or within the local church. How many brothers and sisters have, had someone do something that has upset you, and how do we handle that? Because that has caused a lot of relationships, hasn't it? It's sad when we see two Christians that have there's a dispute among them, and one person says something or they do something to another one, and sometimes they don't even realize they did anything. But what happens? That one that felt like they were wronged just sits on that, and they let it fester, and they just build their anger, and then anger leads to resentment, and before you know it, you have two families or individuals in a congregation that won't even talk to each other when they come in through those front doors. One sits on one side of the auditorium, the other one sits on the other side, and they just, they'll pass each other, might smile to be cordial, and that's it. They just want nothing to do with each other. And yet we expect these people to come in, sit down. They have a dispute with one another, and then they expect God to just be happy with the praise and the worship that they're trying to offer up. Meanwhile, they have this they have this confrontations with each other, or they have these harsh feelings towards each other. When you look at just some of these, Christ says, "If your brother sins or offends or does wrong against you," this has caused so much pain. It has crippled fellowship. It has ended relationships because we don't know what to do when it happens. You see, the world just says, "We'll just stay mad at them or just don't have anything to do with them." The world's fine just gossiping behind other people's backs or just going to whoever you can to tell them. But that's not what the Bible says about how the church is to handle these different things. Christ, on the other hand, has a solution. And the solution that Christ has involves compassion. And that's what we need to remember. Whether we are the ones that have to go to someone else saying, "Look, why did you do this to me?" Or if we are the ones that, pray tell, someone has to come to us and say, "You did this to me," both ways need to be handled with compassion and an open mind and a willingness to listen. But here's what Jesus tells them when that happens. Instead of just letting it go and building up that resentment and just wanting nothing to do eventually with another person, here's what Jesus has to say. He says, first and foremost, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. Folks, communication can mean everything when something like this occurs. Communication can resolve so many differences. It can resolve so many different issues when you actually go to that person and have a sit down with them and talk to them. And when that other person is willing to sit down, but for some reason, you know what has happened in the course of all of this over the years? Many have chosen to bypass this first instruction. They don't just go to that person. They don't just talk to that individual. You notice what it doesn't say? It doesn't say go tell it to the church first, does it? That doesn't come until later. It doesn't it doesn't say go and just run to the elders first thing. Oh, well, I have this issue with this person. Well, go talk to the elders. You know how tired the elders get when they're the first ones that hear about a problem? Go talk to Charles. Go talk to Jim. Go see how many. when something can be taken care of long before you go to one of them. Because the elders aren't babysitters. And I think sometimes we try to treat them, and it almost plays out like daycare. Well, this person did this to me, or he called me this name, or he said this about me. Well, I guess I'm going to have to go tell the teacher and have them deal with this. And we just go tattle and running to the elders. But that's not what Jesus says to do. Jesus says, first off, you go to that individual and you talk to them and you sit down and let them know why they have offended you. What have they done? Why is this, why are you even feeling this way? He says, you and him alone. You know what it also doesn't mean? To herald it all over social media and tell everyone you know how bad this other individual is and what they've done to you. It doesn't mean to go to all the members and say, guess what so-and-so did? I hope you take my side, and you try to get people on your side or play to their sympathy. And meanwhile, a lot of the times that person just has no idea what they've even done. He says, you go to them alone. And that's your first step. You go to them and you sit down and you try to talk to them. By the way, I don't think a lot of people realize this. When you're on social media, when you put something down on social media, even if you mean it for just one person, what a lot of people don't realize, or it just has gone over their head, or they've got such tunnel vision when they talk about it, is that everybody else who's on that, on that friends list can see the same thing. And while you might not mean for them to see that, you're telling this individual, well, this is this is what this person's done, and this is what's wrong with, inside the church or inside the congregation, and they've done this and this and this, and everybody's reading that. Or you just start talking about it to everyone. Think about what that does for the reputation of the church when that's the first thing you do. And those are the people that you come. Do you realize you consider the damage that you can do publicly, and how those outside of the church especially are going to see it? Because when you start firing off on social media, someone outside of the church is going to see that, or they're going to find out about it. And how do you think they feel all of a sudden about the church? You see, those are the people we're trying to reach. But if all they hear is just, well, this person did this, or I'm so sick and tired of this person doing this, or we're mad about something, and we just air our laundry to everyone except for who we should be. Think of what that makes the church look like to someone. I have seen so many failed attempts at trying to reach the lost because the lost see how the church operates, and then they say, well, why would I want any part of that? And it's unfortunate. It's frustrating. At the very least, I can't imagine what God must be thinking when he gave us what to do. We need to be mindful of who sees what we are typing and saying and how they might respond to that and react. There's a reason Christ didn't say, okay, go tell it to everyone. There's a reason why Christ didn't say tell it to the church first. There's a reason why Christ didn't say tell it to everyone who you know. Because we need to keep it concealed to see if we can work through it first off. And why? Well, he tells us in the second part of verse 15. He says, if he hears you, you've gained your brother. If you work this out and you go and you talk to them and actually let them know why you're upset like you are, or how you feel they have offended you, or why you've taken something so personally, and you're able to work this out, which most of the time it can be worked out just simply by communicating with them. It says, you have gained your brother, and how great is that when you can sit down and talk to someone and be back in fellowship and go to worship services together and to be clear and free of any resentment that you might be feeling or any harsh feelings, you have gained your brother. That's the mindset when I go to someone else of what it needs to be. But of equal importance is the person that is receiving that visit. The one getting that visit should be open. They need to be open-minded. They need to be open to, why would this person feel this way towards me? Why are they coming to me in the first place? We sometimes have the habit of reacting to something instead of responding to it or retaliating against someone. Well, if they, who are you to come to me and say this? Why, who are you to? And then they push back. When again, communication is everything. One getting that visit should be humble enough. Remember, this is a meeting of resolution. It's not a meeting of retaliation. It's not a meeting of, for someone to just get upset or anyone to get upset. It's a meeting to sit down and clear the air and try to iron this out. He said, if your brother sins against you, you go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. And why? Because if he hears you, you've gained your brother. And there have been so many times that it could have stopped right here and have a relationship reconciled. It doesn't always happen that way, though, does it? And Christ said, okay, if that doesn't work, get others to help. Why? Jesus said, if you will not hear, take with you one or two more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word may be established. You think of what that can do. You have someone else come with you, you sit down, you start talking about different things, you have other people in present. This way nothing can be misunderstood, nothing can be taken out of context. You have someone else there who's able, or they should be able, to keep an objective mind about this whole thing. Now, when you go to someone with someone else, this is not the time, this is not an ambush. You're not trying to just, gang up on them. It's a way to sit down and try to clear, to try to bring up and clear the reason why there is all this resentment. And so when you bring someone else, if you've tried to talk to them individually, and if you can't establish anything individually, then you bring someone else in the hopes that maybe something can be resolved. And a lot of the times it can be resolved in that way. And so you get that other person to come with you. The priority should be try to resolve by talking to them. Not to just say, well, not for just to have a couple of people against one individual with that. But we also know that sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes a person won't listen to a few people when they come and try to talk to them. Keeping in mind that it needs to be done lovingly and wanting someone to come back. Because this whole thing has to do with someone getting so upset that it's affecting their spiritual life, that it's affecting their relationship with people in the church. And Christ said that's not okay. And so he says, okay, if the 2 or 3 witnesses, if that doesn't work, and sometimes it doesn't, he says, then you get the church to try to help. He says if he refuses to hear them, these individuals that come to them, then you can tell it to the church. This gets the church family involved to try to correct something or someone. Because no one is going to care for you like your church family will. And Jesus knows that. Remember, this is all to settle a dispute. But he said, if you can't go one-on-one with them, if that doesn't do anything, and then you get other brethren who lovingly try to come and they want to try to clear this up, if that doesn't work and they don't want to listen to them, then you get your church family involved to try to come. This is not a time for gossip. It's not a time for, for all of this to spread around the church family and just have you talk at potlucks or on the phones or just when you come into worship or when that person's not there, then you can talk about that situation because you're safe because you know that they're not there to hear it. And it's not a time to just, to go into the hallways or whatever, just to, just get in different circles to try to gossip about the situation. That's not what the church family is designed to do. The whole premise of getting the church family involved with it is to try to get someone back. And that means that we need to be sensitive to a situation. And very often prayer is involved with that situation. This is how Jesus talked about settling disputes. And it's happened. It's not something that generally we like to think about because we like to think that every congregation is the best congregation, right? That, if we're the Church of Christ, then nothing's going to happen. But we fall, we're human, aren't we? And it is going to happen. And what he's doing is he's preparing us that when it does happen, we're going to know how to handle it. So that we're not just blindsided by, this happened. What do we do now? It's not a time, we don't gossip about it. We don't try to talk behind someone's back. Our intention is to try to restore. Our intention is to try to get them to understand why it is so important with their relationship with the church. What that means. And then, if that doesn't work, then we take the next step. Jesus says, but if he refuses even to hear the church, and Christ must have known that there were people that would not want to hear anything for anything, that they just wanted to be as stubborn as they could be. And he says, if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. Those poor tax collectors, they have a bad reputation. They were known to, to be dishonest. How ironic it was that one of the apostles ended up being a tax collector. But they did not have a good reputation at all. He says, if he refuses to hear the church, then let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. Then you don't have to have anything to do with them. You've tried. There comes a point when you've exhausted every single thing that you possibly can do. It's interesting when I know this congregation has been involved with in a couple of situations where we've had to withdraw. That's not easy for an eldership to come to that conclusion. They don't just make that on a whim. They discuss it with each other. They pray about it. They think over it. They meditate on it because it is a tough decision to make to withdraw fellowship with someone because you've tried everything else possible to try to get someone to correspond with what the Bible has to say. And it's the very last thing that they want. And it should be the very last thing that we should want to have, to treat someone like a heathen and a tax collector. And you notice this, how it builds. The purpose of every single step is to save the one who has done wrong, to bring them back, to get them to understand, to change. And if we're the one in that situation, are we open enough to look at why someone might feel that way about us? About why they might be upset? Are we open-minded enough to say, maybe it is me? Maybe I am the one that needs to change. This kind of, where this leads is the last option and done only when everything else has been exhausted. Jesus knew exactly how to handle this. And he was patient with people. Oh, how I'm glad Jesus is patient. I'm glad he's patient with me. And he's been patient with every one of us, hasn't he? But as you see in this, the implication of it, the one who ignores the plea of the church is the one who has turned his back on it. Wants nothing to do with it. Doesn't want to listen, doesn't care. No one wants to see someone lost, and especially one who is in Christ. He wants to see you come back. He wants to see us change. He wants to see me change. He wants to see you change. Be ready to welcome a person back like that. Don't gossip about them. Don't talk about them. Don't make them feel awkward. Welcome them back when a person's ready, when a person's willing to do that. That's what Jesus says to do. He wants us to be sensitive to other people. And if you're the one that needs to correct something in your spiritual life, friends, by all means, please know that you have the support of this church family to do that. You need to be able to feel that confident that you can do it. There might be someone here this morning that needs to correct something. And you need to understand that this church family does support you. We don't even need to know all the details. We just want to be able to pray with you. But we want to make sure, and God even more wants to make sure, that this morning, whatever you have hanging over your head, that you are willing and able and to take care of it and to change so you can have that relationship with him again and you can have the relationship with his church. Let's stand and sing.